So can you please welcome to the Baobab stage the wonderful Nemu.
I love to shag. How am I going to compete with that? Cross. The wisdom in your hands. Hello. I'm Danny. Hello. I'm waving. Look, I'm waving. And I'm passing over a lot of information with this wave. Firstly, that I'm not holding a weapon, so you can relax. Secondly, look at the angle of my thumb. Look at the length of my third finger. Isn't that interesting? We've been waving for a long time, human beings, and we still do it. We even do it on Zoom calls, have you noticed? Not at the beginning, that'd be weird, but at the end, bye. And I'm there taking screenshots because I'm a palmist. That's my job. I don't often, well, I didn't used to tell people that I was a palmist because people look at you like you're an idiot or a charlatan. But I decided to change my mind about that when I had this gig in the vaults. It was actually the day I had 2 gigs on one day as a palmist. That was the second gig I did in that outfit, and I had a daytime one as well. And I finished at 4 o'clock, and I went to the tube station to get the tube, and there was a guy there, a drunk, friendly guy, and he said, "What have you been doing tonight?" And I was going to say, okay, am I going to lie? Well, I'm going to get into a complicated conversation. And I said, "I'm a palmist." And he said, "Oh, you're a palmist, are you? Read these then." And he produced his hands, both of his hands looked like that, more or less, and I went all the way up to Swiss Cottage. The guy's hands were fascinating, and I read them all the way. Look at that guy's headline. Look at that line going all the way down into the mound of Pluto there. What a fascinating hand that guy had. So for a long time, in the medieval period, for example, the hand was all you would have got, waving from the carriage as your aristocratic overlords went past you. I don't know if you saw the picture of the Pope earlier there, but there's a whole branch of European palmistry which is about looking at the various different lengths of the phalanges between your knuckles and what you can tell. Are they interested in agriculture? Are they good at communicating with other people? What's their will? How willful are they? We've been doing palmistry for a long time. For about 40, 50, 100,000 years, the only thing on TV was the sky at night, so we got good at astrology and astronomy, and the world around us during the day, so we got good at herbalism and meteorology and all those kind of things, and other people's bodies. So we looked at them a lot. These are some of the oldest cave paintings. In fact, the first thing that it seems there are in cave paintings are hands. That one is a beautiful hand there on the right. About 40,000 years there have been cave paintings of hands. As soon as we could blow ink down a bone, we were already doing this. There's one potentially older cave painting, which is a red dot. But yeah, we've been doing this for a long time. In the Vedic tradition has references to Samrudmudrika Sastra. Mudra means, the mudras that people do with their hands. It means a mark or a sign. And this is the art of reading the signs of the body and interpreting them. And it goes back at least 1,500 years. It goes back to at least 1,500 BC. Probably a longer tradition. And even before we had hands, monkeys had hands. And have a look at these. You'll notice that the third digit is longer than the first digit. The ring finger is longer than the first finger in all of these monkeys and all of these apes. And as we get down here to the chimpanzees and the gorillas and the orangutans, you'll notice that the first finger, the index finger, is getting longer and longer. But until humans, there are no apes which have a longer index finger than a third finger. And when you get to humans, then you do, which is really interesting because the first finger in palmistry is about the identity, and it's about consciousness, and it's about the will. And you can see as monkeys develop into apes, into humans, the consciousness becomes greater, becomes stronger, and the first finger develops as well. And in about 1 in 10 human beings, the first finger is longer than the third finger. And scientists are finally catching up to this with what they call the 2D, 4D ratio, right? 2D is the second digit, 4D is the fourth digit. So that's the first finger and the ring finger, or rather the index finger and the ring finger. So there's been a whole lot of science on this. Firstly, they discovered that it is predicated by how much testosterone, I should say testosterone, and estrogen there is in your mother's womb when you're gestating, right? The first finger grows under the influence of of estrogen. And the third finger goes under the influence of testosterone. And so there's all kinds of studies into this kind of thing. For example, this one here, looking at the other correlates with this low ratio, that means people who've got a longer third finger than a first finger. Their birth weight is higher, their length of the child is higher, their body mass is higher, testosterone levels during adulthood are higher, the number of children that men father is greater when they have a longer third finger, ring finger. And then there's all kinds of personality traits that you can read as well. The science has come up with that people with a long third finger are more agreeable. They argue less with women. Men argue less with women when they've got a long third finger, which is kind of interesting because testosterone is about drive and those kind of things. But the first finger, estrogen, is more about, from a palmist perspective anyway, is about your own moral system and your own spiritual values and those kind of things, you know. When people wag their finger at you, they're telling you what they think. And when you say, oh, I know, you know, that's what you do with your first finger. It's about me and my place in the world. So we don't really argue unless we've got some strong ideas about our moral system. There's also correlates with psychiatric disorders. Now, when the third finger gets longer and longer, you're more likely to have autistic spectrum disorders, ADHD, and addictions, which again is quite interesting. They're the kind of things where you need like a whole load of focus, you know, a whole load of drive to pursue an addiction, or to get like ADHD. They have kind of a hyper focus. And I'm speaking from experience here. When the first finger gets long, you're more likely to end up with schizophrenia. The first finger is to do with, again, your identity, your consciousness, all those kind of things that drive you mad. So looking at that from a palmist perspective is pretty revealing. That third finger is the finger of Apollo. It's the finger of fire. And Apollo drives his fiery chariot carrying the sun across the sky. And the first finger is the finger of Jupiter, right? And again, grows under the influence of estrogen. Jupiter governs your morals and spirituality, your self-worth and your status. It's about meaning making. So when I see someone who's got a long first finger as a palmist, I'm expecting them, they might end up being a teacher. They're probably going to be bossy. The longest first finger in the room will always be the bossiest. It's a really, really easy one, that one. Apollo is, so can you see how that correlates with the endocrine system, with the estrogen? So people who have high levels of estrogen are more empathic, they have better intuition. They have better emotional awareness, and they seem to be more driven towards harmony and connection. So think about Jupiter, the wisest of the gods, you know, the king of the gods, the greater benefic. He wants everyone to grow and do well. People with lots of estrogen have more nurturing capacities as well. And then Apollo, the Apollo finger, which is this one, the longer that gets, the more you expect someone to have artistic flair. They tend to take risks more, and they are pleasure-seeking, which correlates with testosterone, the competitive drive, the impulsiveness, the focus. Why am I interested in this? I got a text today actually from someone who said, "Oh, I've been looking at ChatGPT and it said that palmistry has no science behind it." Firstly, that's flatly wrong, and secondly, the idea that people in faraway places all over the world with their cultures hadn't managed to come up with anything whilst looking at hands for tens of thousands of years is a pretty arrogant way of looking at the world. I think it feels quite important to me to not only practice in my practice as a palmist, so I don't really, it feels important to acknowledge the fact that there are knowledge systems and wisdom systems that are a little bit more detailed than what we've got. So I'm going to talk you through how a palmist looks at the hand, right? Imagine a baby in the womb like this. The thumb is the closest thing to the baby, and the thumb, from a palmist perspective, governs the will and logic, particularly the will, the most intimate part of the self, the closest thing to the self. So someone's got a strong thumb, or someone's got their thumb that sticks out a lot. It tells you a lot. If somebody's thumb is stiff, then they're going to be more stubborn. If somebody's thumb is floppy, they're going to be more easily led. And that's quite interesting because cortisol governs how stiff your ligaments are, right? And estrogen governs how floppy your ligaments are. There's a very close correlation between the endocrine system and the hands. As apes develop, the thumb kind of comes out from in line with the fingers and it comes round. You can see there on the chimpanzee, it's coming off to the side. Then when you get to the human, the thumb comes into full opposition with the fingers, right? And that's fascinating because the thumb, governing your will, can go against the rest of the organism, right? There aren't other apes, and there aren't, in fact, other animals which can starve themselves to death for a political point, for example. We don't have hunger strikers amongst the apes. We don't have suicide bombers amongst the apes. But human beings, their will, by the force of will, they can go against the rest of the organism, and the thumb can go against the rest of the hand. Right, Sonic Hedgehog. This is the name of a morphogen, right? I'm mainly talking about the endocrine system, the hormones today. But there is a morphogen. There's a chemical that's produced by your body which influences the way that various bits of your bodies are produced. For example, the hand. So and it's called Sonic Hedgehog because the guy who named it had a weird sense of humor and a kid who liked Sonic the Hedgehog. But so this particular morphogen is involved in basically telling the different fingers what they do, right? So the thumb, it tells to grow in a certain way. The little finger, it tells to grow in a different way. And if it goes wrong, you can end up with more fingers than normal or strange-shaped fingers, right? So it influences digit development, but it also influences brain development, and particularly the differentiation of different parts of the brain, right? And one of the areas where it works on is the prefrontal cortex, right? The prefrontal cortex in humans, unlike apes and monkeys, grows and continues growing, and it gets massive. That's the bit at the front of the head. And it grows up until when people are in their 20s, right? And the prefrontal cortex is involved in social reasoning. It's involved in impulse control. So the reason that when you go into the donut shop, you don't eat all the donuts is because you have impulse control. Now, chimpanzees don't have that in the same degree that we have, right? So it's about will and limiting our will. The reason that you don't bite your boss when they annoy you is because we have social reasoning, right? This is the things that develop with the prefrontal cortex as the thumb comes round, and they're both governed by Sonic Hedgehog. Silly, isn't it? So we talked about Jupiter. There it is, Jupiter, the first finger. So as we're going through the fingers, right, the thumb is the most intimate part of the self from a palmist perspective. The first finger is the next layer. So we go through different layers of the self as we go from this side, from the inside to the outside. And the first finger is the finger of the self. Yeah, so we've talked about that, the Jupiter finger, governing one's self-worth, one's morals, and the connection with estrogen and harmony and emotional awareness. Where do I fit in with this group, for example? That's a question that the first finger has kind of pertains to. This is Saturn, right? And that's connected, so we're kind of halfway through the hand. We've got the will, we've got the self, and then we've got the middle part, which is where we interface with the outside world, because the little finger is the outside world. So this is Saturn, and Saturn governs how we deal with institutions, how we deal with knowledge, the kind of stuff that we put on top of our self. It's the structures that we live by, right? So structure, discipline, responsibility, maturity. And that is influenced by growth hormone. It's by the pituitary system, right? The pituitary gland is the third eye in our head. So that influences bone length. So it makes the Saturn finger long. It makes them all long, but you see it most in that one. Inhibits fat. That means that your fingers are going to be more bony. They're going to be less chubby, right? You're going to have more knobbly knuckles. Palmists see knobbly knuckles as more analytical mind. It influences the way that ligaments grow. In terms of your structures, it's really interesting. It governs the cycles, the circadian and menstrual cycles. For example, the third eye, right? So those are the structures of our lives, the rhythms of our lives. And then we get onto the, the other thing about it is it regulates both testosterone, which is the third finger, and estrogen, which is the first finger. So there you've got the kind of the structuring middle finger and its influence on the two fingers on either side. Now this is much more sophisticated than the scientists have got anywhere near to. So for example, when a palmist is looking, he's looking at, does the first finger, when you gesture, is the first finger far away or is it close to the second finger, for example, right? When people are gesturing about themselves. I know, when people are, the Catholic blessing, which is like this, so that's the structure of the middle finger and the consciousness of the first finger, right? You hear about this stuff in our language as well. When we talk about being under someone's thumb, for example, we are talking about being under their will. So you see this all over the place. The Apollo finger, we've talked about that. Its role in art and risk and pleasure and drive and focus and determination. The last finger is the finger of Mercury. So now we're at the ring finger is what we send out into the world, right? So as we go through the layers, it's what we put out into the world. It's our productivity, our creativity, our drive. The little finger is how we engage with the other, right? So it's Mercury. It's to do with communication with the other. It's to do with practical intelligence. It's to do with business skill as well. People. It's to do with the spirits as well. It's to do with all those kind of connections. When you see some strange print on the last finger, then you know that they're going to have a kind of strange spiritual life. Now that's governed by the thyroid and the pituitary. I'm going to say very briefly one other aspect of palmistry, which I want to talk about, is the fingerprints, because the fingerprints are a record of the first interaction that the organism has with the environment, which is how the baby in the womb is moving their fingers in the womb. Because you have these things called volar pads, right? They look like that, and they're these kind of balloons that grow on the end of the fingers. And then when those balloons shrink, they leave ridges, which are your prints. So that first one over there is called a whirl. It's called a loop. And the loop is, you can see that the amniotic fluid has pushed the volar pad that way. So when it's shrunk, and it's left that mark. This one here is a whirl. That's different. It means that the kind of force and the developmental force, but also the posture of the finger in the womb has maintained its integrity. And therefore, when the volar pad shrinks, it leaves these concentric circles. Can you see that? How that one works? So this is the first interaction with the environment. And again, you see this emerging as humans come out of the line of the apes. You get more and more of these whirls. You get more power into the fingers. And the fingers, from a palmist perspective, are how we touch the world. So we've got our nature, and then we've got how we bring it into the world, which is through the fingerprints. And again, there's some science catching up with that. So for example, people with more loops These are the, what do you call it, Myers-Briggs? I think that's what it's called. Personality tests. So they find different personalities with these things. People with loops tend to be more moderate, which is kind of makes sense because it's a water print. Also, it means that the amnion has been pushing it. People with whirls have a stronger sense of responsibility. They're enthusiastic. They tend to be better leaders, for example. So what is normal? There's a question I really want to kind of finish on here. That is a simian line, quite common in Down syndrome, for example. Over 60% of Down syndromes have a simian line. It's where the head line and the heart line go together. It's where they move together. It's also very commonly found on musicians. So that's Method Man. It's commonly found on athletes and founders of companies. What is normal? When we talk about endocrine function, we're often talking about whether it's hyper or is it hypo? Is it under or is it over? So I just want to kind of challenge that a little bit with a quote from Charlotte Wolff, who was a fantastic psychologist and palmist, woman who wrote the first book on the psychology of lesbianism, very forward-thinking woman in the 1930s and 40s. She writes this, talking about the hypothyroid hand. Right, that means the thyroid system is underdeveloped. She says this, the effect of an underdeveloped thyroid gland is well illustrated by the small, fat, broad hands found most frequently in women. Such hands are white and flabby, with sausage-shaped fingers, the tips of which are short and usually conical, with a strikingly pointed little finger. Such people have a very definite type of personality. They appeal to their fellows by their love of the good things in life, their desire for comfort and luxury, and the atmosphere of glamour with which they surround themselves. They have very little self-discipline and cannot resist the temptation to have a good time. They're good company, kind-hearted and open-minded, but unstable and erratic. They lack concentration and their intelligence runs along practical rather than theoretical lines. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you my ideal woman. So I'm going to be around for a little while in the breaks. If you want to come and talk to me and show me your hands, you're totally welcome, especially if you have sausage-shaped fingers and a pointy little finger. This are my sites. I'm teaching palmistry at Tagmai in the Old Town on 31st. Please come along. You can't see it there because it's off the page, but my website, if you want a palm reading, is dannydpalmistry.com. Thank you very much.